Hello and welcome back to Tiny Artist TV. Today is going to be the first video in a series that I'm going to be calling Time Warp Tuesday. So basically, because we're coming on to the end of a decade, a lot of artists have been redrawing some of their old pieces. So yeah, I went all the way back to my first DeviantArt account and pulled some pieces from 2009. This is the first of 5 pieces that I have pulled. It's a sketch of my character, Shaman, who was this magic wolf. This was right around the height of Sparkle Dogs. My friends and I were all playing Okami. You can probably see those strong influences there. So what I'm doing first is the main goal is not just to draw these better to see how much as artists we've improved, but to still kind of capture the essence of whatever it was that the original piece was. So, the first thing I'm doing here is I'm just trying to capture all of the original shapes that I have here. The pose is pretty much the same, but you'll notice that, or maybe you won't notice, because right now the pose looks okay, but this is before I use a reference. And that's the other thing is that back when I was younger, I used to not really use references unless I was explicitly told to by an art teacher. But after getting the initial sketch and all of the little elements that I want, I go online and I find a reference of the pose that I actually want so that it's drawn anatomically correct. And you'll see that there is a little bit of a difference between the one that we have here that I'm lining out now and then the one that's actually the right way to draw it. I wasn't too far off, but you'll see how much of a difference using a reference actually makes. And even here you can tell where I'm trying to fix the tail. The tailbone is way too high, so I just keep shaving it down and shaving it down, but that's the least of my issues. So here you can see my reference, and I'm pretty much pointing out to myself what needs to be shifted. So the hips need to come down, and the legs on the same side need to come in versus I had the anterior and posterior legs going in different directions, which is not quite right. So I fix the pose with a fresh sketch and then I line over the new sketch and it looks 100 times better. As a matter of fact, even though she is supposed to be a wolf, so she actually ends up kind of looking a little bit more like a German Shepherd just with the way the body is shaped, but just with the way that the pose is laid out, it ends up making her look like she's about to take flight, which really works because she's a magic wolf. Like, it's kind of ethereal and it just works really well. Of course, you'll immediately notice one of the main differences is the original sketch had no color whatsoever. And not only am I adding color to this piece now, but I'm also adding a background. So I just do this simple snowy moonlit woods background just to kind of give her somewhere to stand so that she's not just in this white empty space. And then for the color, I do have, so I had this whole lore for these characters, and this is actually the mother of one of my other wolf characters. And the color palette is like a white, a turquoise, and like a bright neon cyan. So I just used the same colors from her daughter character and pulled them into this character. Of course, using like glowy effects just to make it more quote-unquote magical. So yeah, that's pretty much the main differences, is A, adding color, and B, adding a background, and just coloring it in with techniques that I've picked up over the past 10 years as an artist. I tried putting in the trees with this like shorthand method that I had kind of picked up along the way, where I just use a smudge set to 100 on the rectangle brush to make branches, but it looks super messy, so I get rid of it, and then I do a chalk brush instead to kind of make them look dissipated, like kind of shadowy, and it also really matches really well with the texture of the snow, because I end up using the same brush that gives it that soft, powdery, snow fluffy look. I don't know what words I'm looking for at this point. So here you can see where the brush is kind of that chalky texture. And now I'm just cleaning up the colors a little bit. At this point, I have my line layer set to overlay, which is something I had talked about in one of my All Ghost videos, where I'll sometimes set the lines to overlay so that the colors can come through more. When you're working with bright colors like this, it's kind of obnoxious though, because whatever you don't color in is really dark. So I picked a little bit and tried to get it as perfect as I could, but then I also remembered that I'm adding a glow effect to everything at the end, so it doesn't really matter. And the other thing is that with the white highlight fur, as you can see, it's also covering up whatever lines weren't covered up in the initial coloring, because it's a pure color versus a tint or a tone. So it doesn't show through because it's just white. There's nothing for the lines to overlay. The brush I'm using is just a bristle brush. Oh my goodness. And I used the smudge tool to make it look like it's fluffy fur. Adding a little bit of darker gray underneath just to make it look like there's some sort of... The white by itself looks really nice, but it did need that extra bit of shadow to push the variance in fur color. Just adding in a few more highlights with the white brush. A little bit. At the end, I do get rid of some of the lines in the wings because they just kept getting in the way and it just made it look really messy. So I take my eraser tool and set it to, I think it was like a 50 or 60, so that they're not totally gone, but so that they're not as visible. And I use an airbrush to add a little bit of a glow effect to like the spirits and the wings, which are supposed to be kind of just like this manifested energy. They're not really these like crystalline pieces. I don't know what kind of combination. It's kind of cyberpunky, but erasing the little bits of lines and then blending the color down makes them look a little more wispy and a little more like energy versus a solid piece of material. I couldn't quite get the highlights right. I do keep some of them in, but this solid line down the back was just way too strong, and you can kind of see where I'm playing around with a few different trials. Like I try a fluffy line, and then I try a solid line, and then I try to just kind of dapple some in, make it a little bit glowy, and it looks too... it's too strong, but like not in a good way. Like, so I leave it alone. Add in a few paw prints with a gray brush, and now I'm just playing around. Like, the picture at this point is finished. I'm playing around with the snow just to see if I like it or not. I'm using a chalk brush and a bristle brush and just kind of like smearing things around to see what works and what doesn't. So now we're pretty much at the end of the piece for today. So here's the old one, and here is the new and improved 2019 piece of Shaman. So I hope you guys enjoyed this first Time Warp Tuesday. I'll see you guys next time. Have a weird day.